Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. And Marcus, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, Mike, pleasure to be here.
So Marcus and I got acquainted at this year's Abundance 360 event, which was all virtual. But it was kind of cool that it was virtual because even though you didn't get well, you all know what it's like to do something in person versus over Zoom or whatever. It's kind of not the same, but there are advantages, and one of the advantages are you get to communicate with a lot of people through the platform, through the Zoom platform, that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. So I took advantage of that. Reached out to Marcus because he was explaining and actually showing us a demonstration of this technology called spatial web, which we'll talk about later, which was unbelievably cool. And I was like, okay, so I got to connect with this guy, and we did, and then fortunately, he was willing to do the podcast today. So, Marcus, I start every one of my podcasts with the same simple question: how did it happen for you?
Yeah, well, one add-on note to that summit was we
Yeah,
had 300 Oculus Quests that we sent out to everybody, so we did it in virtual reality. So that
which
was
was super cool. Like
yeah, yeah,
I've
that
been
was kind of
using
a
my
first. Yeah,
I had never used an Oculus before, but I've been using it ever since I got that for the Supernatural
yeah.
app that thing's awesome, man.
Well, the thing that was interesting about that was a year ago, I wouldn't even propose to Peter Diamandis that we do with all the members of A360 a 300-person virtual reality session.
Right.
Like it would have cost too much. The software wasn't very good. The headwear makes you sick. All these problems, but there's been this inflection point really in the last few months where really accelerated by COVID, quite frankly, where these headsets that cost thousands and thousands of dollars are now a few $100. The quality went way up, and the software is basically free software that would have cost tens of thousands of dollars before. And now you can get in these environments, and as we showed at that summit, we were all in these environments, not just getting in there just for fun. We went in there to actually have CEOs of companies share with other CEOs, here's how I use virtual reality for the commercial side of my business.
It
Right.
was it was immersive and super cool. I shared it with all my YPO buddies because I'm like, there's something to this. I thought the VR headsets was all kid stuff, Marcus. I
Yeah,
just wasn't. But
totally. Yeah.
that was the spatial web. Uh, it, that experience was the highlight. Certainly one of the major highlights of the conference for me.
Yeah. And that's a little bit, I'm having board of directors meetings with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies in these environments now. So
Mm.
I mean, it's real. So that's a little bit to answer the question you asked about how did it happen. I mean, where I would like to, that's kind of an open-ended question, and there's probably a lot of directions I could go, but it's a timely question for me because I I actually mentor a group of young people from low income underserved communities. I've been doing this for years from around 2015. And particularly I adopted a high school in South Central Los Angeles back in 2015, where I basically went into the high school to the principal and the superintendent because they were in the LA Times and they were being very innovative in terms of how they were thinking about reinventing the school that was Jefferson High School in South Central LA, which was really at a point where it was um, scorched earth. I mean, it was not functioning properly at as a public school.
Right.
And so the parents and everyone in the district kind of came together and they adopted the school and they tried. It was really endearing. Like all the parents in the community came together and said, "How can we reinvent the school?" And they got a bunch of bids from a bunch of consulting firms and all this stuff. And eventually they gave the bid to the community and the parents to basically say, let us reinvent this. And they called it Nava College Prep. And they made it a school where they branded it like college prep. They put everybody in uniforms and they put a school within the school. So Jefferson High School basically had a sister school called Nava College Prep. And when I read that in the LA Times, I'm like, wow, that's so amazing. Like all the momentum they have. I just wonder what they're teaching in this school. And if that's changing at all. And so
Mm.
I approached the high school principal and the superintendent and went out there and basically said, are you teaching people to prepare them for college or to be entrepreneurs if they don't go to college around skills like virtual reality, like we were talking about virtual reality or spatial web or blockchain or artificial intelligence or 3D printing or nanotechnology or biotechnology? And they're like, they like, no, we're not. That's not part of the public school system. We're not teaching any of that. And I said, well, you need to, because I'm advising top tier MBA programs. I'm advising CEOs of large companies on the type of future of work and the type of talent they're going to need. And they're going to need people with these skills. And they're not technical skills either. I'm not saying they have to learn how to code in artificial intelligence and these other things. I'm not a big proponent of coding as a bankable skill set. I think it helps develop the brain a certain way, but I think artificial intelligence is going to do a lot of the coding. And if you're going to make a career coding, you better be an exceptional coder. And that's just not in the cards for everybody to learn how to code. So I've been advocating, it's more valuable, especially in my roles where I was an executive at Deloitte Consulting and at Bain. The best talent pool that I can find are entrepreneurial mindsets that understand the toolbox of all these technologies and how to use them to solve business problems or social problems, not the nuts and bolts of how to code it all. That's actually a more valuable skill set in the market. So I basically told the high school, like, why don't we teach them about all these tools that are out there, AI, robotics, 3D printing. And this was in 2015 where people weren't even talking about self-driving cars yet, or blockchain and Bitcoin was just being discussed. If these kids know about this stuff, first of all, it's exciting. They want to learn more, because who doesn't want to learn about 3D printing a liver? Like, that's science fiction becoming science reality. It gets real interesting. People get interested in it. Same thing I saw with my two kids that are now out of college. And so long story short, I adopted the high school. We put in this whole curriculum to teach young people about how to be an entrepreneur and how to use these new capabilities, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, sharing economy, all these innovation capabilities, just so they get excited about learning, because it's kind of fun stuff to learn about when you learn about this new stuff. And also, to just wow the college recruiter, or if college isn't in the cards, how you can be self-sustainable and self-sufficient to actually create your own work as an entrepreneur. So that was in 2015. And those young people are now, they went from 15-year-olds to now they're like 21-year-olds, and I still mentor them, and they're running their own businesses. So it's awesome, right? And one of the things in kind of response to your question about how did it happen for me, one of the things I was just talking to them about, because we get on a call every night now, and we're doing a bunch of projects together. I shared with them that, in my 30 years of professional career, from when I got out of college, my first job was at the Kellogg Company in sales and marketing. And it was around 1992. And it turns out that that's the year that the internet was kind of coming to, the dot-com boom and then the internet, right? And so I had kind of a baseline technical understanding, because I went, my mom sent me to computer camp because she was a computer engineer. Okay. But I wasn't super technical. I just understood it well enough. It didn't scare me, and I was like one of the first ones at the Kellogg Company that really understood this technology. And I'm a young person, I'm 19, 20 years old, married with a child already. And, so I'm willing and I have the appetite to work and move up in my career. So I'm like, I became instantly valuable because I was on the cusp of understanding a technology better than anyone else knew that technology, because I was at the right place at the right time. And I was actually using it, and the company was trying to do so many things with, technology, that one move in my whole career, and this is what I was telling these young people the other day, that was being at the right place at the right time. And that literally has made my entire 20, 30-year career after that point. Why? Because I was always naturally ahead of the curve, and so that's how everything happened for me. Like, I don't think I'm much smarter than other people. I just think that I happen to know a certain technology that only comes around every 10, 20 years, kind of a big thing, like the invention of the internet. And I was right there at the right time to really capitalize on that with having the right skill sets, where the company literally saw me as the go-to person. And quickly I was moved into the headquarters at Kellogg's to manage the whole digital transformation of the company. And I was traveling all over the world with them to do that, for putting this system out in the marketplace, which at the time was like a breakthrough technology. It was called Siebel Systems, and it was object-oriented, going from mainframes to client servers. And I just understood all that. Like, it wasn't hard to understand. It's no more harder than understanding how to load a video on TikTok today for someone, right?
Okay, sure.
So what I was sharing with these young people was, there's something like that happening again right now. That if you learn the skill set, you will be on the forefront for the rest of your career. And they all get it, because I'm now employing them all on projects. After 8 weeks of training, they're all getting employed on professional consulting projects that I'm putting them on with my clients. Not because I'm giving them a handout and saying, oh, because you're from a low income, underserved community, let me give you this job. They're actually the best at it. They're digitally native. They understand digital technology. It's more of a creative process now. It's not a technical process to go build out these virtual reality worlds and in VR and augmented reality and virtual reality, which I'll describe in a second.
Okay.
But my whole message to them is, this is kind of like the reinvention of the internet. It's just the spatial web. It's the internet coming out of your computer and coming into a virtual world, or the internet jumping out into the physical world. So when you look at real physical objects, you see digital overlays on those objects. And that's this next generation of the internet. It's happening now. We've been talking about it for years, but it really is coming to fruition now. And we can talk about why that's the case. It's because Apple and Facebook and Google are all doubling down. I mean, you're going to have a pair of glasses within a year that you can wear that will show you the web on your physical world. So as all these consumer products come out to support this, the developer community really starts to develop new innovations. I'm teaching these young people how you can create the next generation of websites, but now it's not an HTML developer coding skill you need that not everyone can learn. It's actually more of a creative process to develop this next generation of websites, because you're literally getting into virtual reality, and literally with your hands in VR, you're decorating stuff. So you're actually coding by doing things with creative skills, not technical coding skills, you know?
Okay, so yeah, so non-coding coding.
Non-coding. And so that's the new technical literacy that I'm teaching. And I'm saying to these young people, if you learn this, I myself am going to employ you right now for a professional job, like 40 to 45 grand a year as a 19-year-old who hasn't gone to college. And the clients are hiring these young people because they don't care what their resume says. They have the skills. And the way I tell these young people is I say, adults are finally realizing, almost like you just said, Mike, where you said, I thought it was just for games.
Yeah.
Adults, especially in the business world, are starting to realize that environment that these kids have been playing all these games in, I can do my work in these environments. And it's pretty amazing. It's like, really, I have superpowers that I can be more conducive for collaboration and productivity than I can, even if I could physically be with someone. Like the light bulbs popping on all these adults in business, and they're like, I need to use this. And then COVID just mandated it. It's like, not only do I need and I could use this, but I actually have to use this because I can't be in person with people. So we have to be remote. So how can I be remote but not have Zoom fatigue and actually be in a virtual reality room where, Mike, you and I are seeing each other, we're walking around each other as if we're in the real room with each other. That technology now exists, and it's cheap. It's almost free. And it happened like overnight. So I'm telling these young people, this is how it happened for me back in 1992, 93. And I was always ahead of the curve. I was always on the bleeding edge. I left Kellogg's to go run a practice at Ernst & Young on that same technology. And then I went in my own business for 7 years on that same technology and that same competency. And then I went to Deloitte as a partner leading innovation, spent most of my time up at NASA at Singularity University, bringing CEOs of big companies around this technology and these innovations. And then I went to be the CEO of X Prize to do big global competitions using these technologies to help solve some of the grandest challenges in the world for social impact versus business impact. And then, of course, most recently, I was at Bain, where I still am an expert advisor to them. I'm also on the board of Stanford's Disruptive Tech and Digital Cities program, all because of what I did in 1992 to get ahead of that curve. And it wired me a certain way, and I was always seen as the expert. And it's just, so that's kind of how it happened to me professionally, right? And it's been fun for me. My life has been more interesting because I've been learning about some really disruptive, progressive innovation technology, not just the technical stuff, but even some of the business model innovation like crowdsourcing and crowd sharing and crowdfunding.
And before everyone else.
Yeah, usually always a step before, sometimes many steps before, to where I'm wired that way. I understand all that stuff very well. And now everything is spiking exponentially. You know, all these technologies are really starting to take off. And I'm basically saying to this group of young people that I mentor, the VR, AR spatial web is taking off. Now's the time to master this. And you will be the expert. You from day one are the expert. You're not playing catch up. You know.
So Marcus, pretend that I'm one of these students. How do you mentor me to believe, you know, that, or how do you mentor me to believe or to position myself, you know, to take advantage of this opportunity? Because
well, I have this, it's called Exponential Destiny. It's at exponentialdestiny.com. And it's volunteer, it's mentorship. It's not a commercial venture for me. It's just me continuing to mentor young people around, really, same thing I did with my two kids. My daughter went to a private college and studied biology, and she was not prepared for the workforce when she got out because they weren't teaching her biotechnology. So I was kind saying, hey, Errol, do you know about CRISPR, gene editing and CRISPR-Cas9? Is your teachers talking about this stuff? No, they're not talking about this stuff. This was 2014, 20. I'm like, well, this is a private university in California. It's like, they're not educating you the right way for the right jobs. And that's a big problem I see in society right now is our education system is not at all preparing people, even like a private school is not preparing people for the types of jobs that they're going to need. AI and robotics are going to replace most of the blue collar and white collar jobs at a pace that we're not even fathoming right now. We're already starting to see it happen. And so if you're really going to have employable skills, there's a different mindset, a different type of thing you need to learn. A lot of it is about entrepreneurialism, not about how do I go get a job for a company? How do I start to think about leveraging the tools that are out there in this World Wide Web and thinking about a way that I can monetize something to give social impact or commercial impact in a way that will help me sustain my livelihood, have employment. It's a lot different discussion. So I talk to these young people about two things. I share with them how to do it, but then I show them so many examples, their confidence level is like, yeah, I could actually do this, like regardless of my background, because there's just too many examples out there of people doing this. Right. It's not rocket science. You just have to break it down and kind of reverse engineer how to do this. Now, are you going to be a multi-million-dollar startup person? Probably not. I don't set expectations that way, but can you probably sustain a livelihood of making between, in your 20s, making between $50,000 and $100,000 a year as a really high probability, if not more? Yeah, that's not a far-fetched notion if you just understand what you should be looking for in terms of how to leverage technology to do things as an individual that only a big company or big business could afford to do 10 years ago, because all that tech has been democratized to where we have access to it now. So it's not rocket science to figure out how to monetize that. And more importantly, I get their confidence level up because I actually have them on phone calls with me. They literally shadow me on calls that I have with CEOs of companies. And I literally introduce to my clients, yeah, on the call here is Pablo or Marco or Iris or Samantha or Sadeja. They're part of my Exponential Destiny team, and I mentor them, and they're going to listen into this whole conversation over the next 8 weeks as we do this project. So they sit there and they listen to me consult these executives about these new technologies, and they realize just the fact that I know what the executives don't know, I'm valuable to them because I know this new technology. Sure. And is that new technology, I have a level of expertise where I could get really deep into the weeds on it, but you don't really need to offer that first level of value. It's like, if I could get a client up and running on a capability that helps them cut costs or grow revenue in their business, and these young people sit on every call and they hear me talking to these CEOs about it, we troubleshoot together with the CEO and we figure out how do you put this into your current business, or we're doing a lot of projects for schools right now on how to transform education as well. So they hear me having the discussion with these clients, they sit through the process. They did that the first time around for 8 weeks. Now they're all graduates. Now they're not even in training. I have them on the calls because I'm paying them to be on the calls now, these young people. And the CEOs of the companies now refer to them by first name and ask them questions. And when we get in virtual reality, they're the ones teaching the CEO and the executive teams how to use the capabilities. So their confidence level goes up because they realize this is just being at the right place at the right time around having knowledge of something that most people don't have knowledge of yet, knowing that everyone's going to want that knowledge.
Sure. Yeah, what a wonderful opportunity for them to get this real world experience on these calls. Like it's one thing to mentor people and just outside of that, but then to introduce them into your actual calls and stuff, you can't put a price on that really. It's like,
it's pretty awesome. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, they say themselves, I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but they say themselves, like, this is, one's a Michigan State grad, and he's like, this is more valuable than anything I learned in, this is like an MBA. Because they're hearing me have a business discussion, and I consider myself a very good professional advisor consultant, like, meaning sometimes consultants get a bad rap, like all these 2x2s that we like to use in sound bites and stuff like that. I take that profession very seriously. I mean, I've worked in industry, I've run my own companies, and I just know how to apply technology to business, whether it's for social impact or commercial impact. So I can really help a company in a matter of weeks do something that might take them a few years to do. And when they see me doing that and they hear those conversations, they realize that it's just a troubleshooting exercise. Like, what are you trying to do in your business? I know a lot about VR and AR and AI and 3D printing and robotics. I don't know. Do I know how to code any of those? I don't need to. I just know they exist and what they can do. I kind of know the art of the possible with each of them. So if you tell me a business problem, even if I don't understand your industry that well, I guarantee one of these technical capabilities is going to be a significant solution for you. We just have to find where. And so they sit in all these calls and they hear me having this. So they hear me do professional advisory consulting work. Like, I'm part of the big five, or I'm part of the, from Bain to Deloitte to,
right.
I'm part of that top tier model.
Yeah,
so
top
I
tier.
know what's valuable in terms of what really good strategic management and technology consulting looks like. It's kind of interesting because the reality is I wouldn't even go to I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but I wouldn't even go to the large consulting firms. When I work for a client today, especially as independent, I wouldn't even suggest to them that they go to like a Bain or Deloitte or McKinsey, because to do some of the more progressive technology innovation thinking. Why? Because they don't really have the technical skills. They didn't grow up technical.
They need those kids that you're mentoring to be working for them.
Exactly. The kids I'm mentoring are actually better resources and talent for that purpose than what I found in big consulting firms. And you don't have the enormous cost of a big consulting firm, which sometimes I think is fair and sometimes I don't think it's fair. Sometimes I think it's dead weight cost that's being added onto a project, because now you have to have all this army of consultants that are all graduates from from Harvard MBAs and Stanford. So there's the most premium resource in our economy in these big consulting firms.
Right.
Well, that's an overkill. And you know what? Not only is it an overkill, but they're not even as talented as some of the young people that I'm mentoring in terms of their ability to deal with technology and digital and innovation and stuff. It's almost good to have someone that isn't framed in their own box of the way they should think. They can really think creatively. So it's, in an interesting way, I feel it's almost a better skill set as well, so it's, the way the program started off, it was kind of during COVID when everyone was out of school. I talked to one of the young people I mentor. His name is Marco. He's valedictorian of the high school in South Central LA. And I've been mentoring since he was 15, super impressive individual. And we spoke when COVID happened. He's like, Marcus, all my friends, like, none of us are going to school. It's like a disaster here in South Central. It's like they switched over real quick because of COVID and people didn't know how to get onto Zoom. And it's like people are falling way behind. And then there's all these articles from the LA Times and New York Times about like everybody's AWOL. Like people are not going to school.
Thousands of kids. I saw that when you.
Thousands of kids. So that was the impetus basically about a year ago now, March, where I was like, hey, Marco, let's create this Exponential Destiny thing where we just, almost like what you're doing with your podcast, I would just do it with my audience was a bunch of young people from South Central Los Angeles or underserved communities. We ended up getting Baltimore and Detroit and reached out to Chicago and stuff. And it was just like, let's just get them on the line because we knew it was very valuable. And rather than me, the wealthy white guy preaching to young people in underserved communities, you can do it. It was really more of Marco, first generational college student. He's got a full ride scholarship to Dartmouth too, who came out of, who lived in poverty. He's my co-host. He's the one who's really sharing with people, this is how you do this. Like, this is not that difficult. You can create a business and serve needs in your community and actually figure out ways to do this because you have access to tools and technology that only big companies and big government had 10 years ago that was normally unaffordable. That's what I taught him. So we started to do this daily broadcast and we realized after about 2 months of that, it was hard to think of new things to say. And we're like, what I got to do is I got to bring you guys onto my live projects that I'm working on with companies. And that basically became the daily Zoom calls, was me talking to the CEO of a company, soup to nuts, from the beginning of the project to the end of the project. And they sat through and listened to the whole thing. There was no expectations of them. Like, they didn't have to contribute. They were there to learn. I just asked that they don't come on late and leave early, and they try to make every call so it's not rude to the client. And, what they realized was after 8 weeks of that, now I had other projects and they were ready to actually be staffed on it. And I was like, great, you can get compensated for this stuff now. Now you know how to do it.
Yeah. And was it cool to see them over the period become more confident of participating and, actually contributing to the calls and stuff? Because that had to be a tremendous growth experience for them.
Well, that was probably the only thing that kept me going. That's what motivated me, was just like, this is working. Like, they're, I wish I would have known. I would have had a couple of them on, maybe we do another podcast where you interview them.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, you can talk to them directly. But yeah, I mean, they're basically, there was 3 factors why I think it started to work. One is, this was not boring stuff we were talking about. Like, to get, 20 young people on a call with me at 6 o'clock Pacific time. That's 9 o'clock Eastern time. And some of them are on the East Coast on a Friday.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of laugh about it. It's like, why are you're 20 years old and you're on a call with me on a Friday night? Like,
Yeah. What's wrong?
and they're religiously on that call. So like, well, the reason why is because there's some fun, exciting stuff happening out there with tech.
Yeah.
Like, it's science fiction becoming science reality. So first of all, and you know, you're hearing about all this stuff like Bitcoins and non-fungible tokens and blockchain and virtual reality. You don't really, when I describe to them what it actually is and kind of demystify how complicated it is and really just understand what it is, they start to realize like, it's kind of fun to learn about this stuff. I mean, we kind of have a good, the call is a very energetic call. It's fun because we're talking about some really unique things that are happening with breakthrough technologies that are happening like on a daily basis now. So that the ability and the wanting to learn about it, my theory was that it was always going to be interesting. Even when I adapted to high school in 2015, I would go in and talk. I'd be the expert lecturer that would come in and just get them all excited about things they never heard about. You know, I brought in a 3D printer in 2015 when people didn't even know what that was. And I showed them how you can just take anything in your imagination and print it off. And I took them on a tour of a 3D printer with my friend Avi Reichenthal, who was the CEO of the largest 3D printing company. So my point is, like, I knew that was because I did this with my kids. I knew that was like the gateway drug to get them excited about learning, like some of these shiny objects. Right. And then once you had them hooked on that, now they wanted to learn about this stuff. Then the thing was, I talked to them about my profession. How do you monetize that knowledge? How can you actually get paid for that knowledge? You know, they didn't even know what a consulting career was. They didn't know what a consulting career meant. They didn't even understand what that term meant. So I basically took them into like knowledge. I told them, like, you know how your teachers told you knowledge is power? My teachers told me that. Right. But the reality is knowledge is not power for everyone, as they rightfully know. They remind me, Marcus, knowledge is not power. I can know a lot, but the bank still turns down my loan because they judge me on my race or my ethnicity.
Yeah, my background, right?
My background. Or I don't get a job at a company, even though I'm the most knowledgeable. So they've seen discrimination. So I'm like, but guess what? Knowledge right now really is power. You know why? Because you don't go to a bank to get a loan for someone to judge you. You can crowdfund. Well, what's crowdfunding? I'm going to tell you what that is. That's going on the internet and asking strangers for money, and it works, and it's a model, and they don't even know what your background is. All they know is what your passion is and what your mission is and what your goals are, because that's what you publish on the crowdfunding site.
Amazing.
And for you to hire people to work for you, where people would discriminate, like be like, well, why would I work for you to run a business? Like, I don't trust you because, or I don't have confidence that you could to work for you because I'm judging you again. You're only 19 or you're only 20 or you're 30 years old. You're an adult learner, but I'm judging you based on your background or the neighborhood or the zip code you're from. When you crowdsource, you don't have that. When you crowdsource talent to get work done for you, you're not dealing with those traditional blockages and biases. And so part of what I did was I educated them that knowledge really is power. And it's not just a line that some privileged white person is giving them saying, come on, knowledge is power. Like, no, I'm like, guys, wake up. Legitimately, no one is there to tell you no. You can actually get access to the world through the internet and bring capabilities to life that you could actually monetize for social impact or for commercial impact, depending on what your passion is. And all those biases are actually no longer exist in that space.
So I want to ask you about crowdsourcing, because so we got like GoFundMe, and then we've got we've got all the crowdsourcing stuff for businesses. And do you think that there was a fundamental shift somewhere in humans that made them like willing to put all this? I don't even know this person. I've never heard of this person, but I'm willing to, back them? Or do you think it was just that people have always been willing to do that, but you had to ask them, say, in person, or you had to know them, and now you can reach them through these platforms? So I'm curious, is human behavior change, or is it a technology, made it accessible and easy?
Well, yeah, it's both. I mean, never in a period of time were you able to do a microfinance transaction for like $1 to some stranger halfway around the world.
Right.
And for me to flip someone $1, I might literally just do that just on the fact that I thought you have an impressive ambition and you seem like an impressive individual. I'm rooting for you. So I'll give you $1, which isn't a lot. But if you, through the internet, you can scale to 1 million people seeing that and giving you $1, next thing you know, that turns into something.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it's, I think it's the same empathy when you see someone, maybe, all of us have experienced where you're walking down the street and you see someone homeless, they're asking for funds or they're asking you for money. society has kind of taught us to judge that a little bit. Like, is it good to give someone money or not? Because are they going to use that money to get alcohol? I mean, there's all these
Yeah.
falsities in
Right.
terms of. But I think there's the reality that every person wants to try to support someone's ambition and someone's dreams, especially someone that really describes their situation that they have need for it. Like they're trying to get out of a situation and they're putting their effort into doing something. Can you help fund me to do that? And it's the same thing. Like, okay, yes, I'll give $1, $10, $100, like just because I want to see that person succeed. And sometimes people do crowdfunding because they get a stake in it. Like there's equity crowdfunding where you're giving money, but you're getting some stake in it too. Yeah. So you're doing it for some self-serving reasons, which is fine. But yeah, it's 100% just the fact that we can do microtransactions. I mean, you're gonna find out soon, like crowdsourcing, you could give 10 cents to something. It used to be, when you and I were growing up, to do you couldn't even do a 10-cent transaction. Like how would you do that? You can't do that you can't go down a credit card and buy a stick of gum for 10 cents. There's usually a minimum that you can charge. Now you got Venmo and everything. It's so easy to move commerce around and capital around, and you can do it on such a micro transaction level. That becomes interesting because, if I was entertained by your video that was pitching me on something you want me to give you money for crowdfunding, I might say just the entertainment value of that last 5-minute video is worth giving you $1.
Yeah, sure. The effort that went into
and then if that gets to be $1 times 1 million people that see it, so crowdfunding, I think, will continue to take more and more permutations in terms of how it happens. There's already the ability, that's where you see cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, because it becomes even easier to transfer. You could see someone in a commercial or in an interview. I could hold up right now on your camera like a QR code and tell people, please send me, if you want to sponsor Exponential Destiny, please send me money here right to this QR code.
Yep. And
I bet you people, after hearing this whole discussion, will be like, yeah, I'm kind of happy and I like to see what Marcus is doing and supporting these groups. I'll give them $1 or $10. So that fluidity of transfer of commerce, and even when you tokenize it with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, it makes it even easier to transfer. And then you get smart contracts. You can actually put conditions around cryptocurrency, meaning I'll give you 5 Bitcoin, which is worth a friggin' lot of money right now. That's actually 5 Bitcoin is worth what? $250,000.
Yeah.
But my point is, I'll give you X fraction of a Bitcoin, but it's on a smart contract that says this money will only be released to you if something happens that we can measure off the internet. Right. So you can put objective criteria in a smart contract that literally says, for example, I could tell you, Mike, if you said, hey, will you fund my podcast? I'd say, you know what? I will give you a certain amount of Bitcoin that's worth $500, but only if the number of likes that I can read off your YouTube video gets to a certain level. So if you can perform and get your YouTube videos to a certain level, my $500 will be released to you. And we could negotiate that all in a smart contract without having a bank or notary or brokerage or escrow company between us. Right. So when you start to hear about blockchain as an architecture, not just the fact that it powers cryptocurrency, you hear about smart contracts. That's what all that means. It means you can start to put these utilities in place where you and I could actually negotiate something like that. But I can give you money only on a condition being met, that the smart contract on the blockchain can read off the internet, which means none of us can interfere with it. It's just code that will execute that promise to you. I promise to pay you 500 if your number of likes on your YouTube video gets above 5,000. As soon as that happens, the money gets released to you. Otherwise, I keep the money. So, what we're going through right now is almost an example I talked to a client with about how they can use smart contracts in the blockchain in their business to do something like that. And imagine if you're a young person listening into this, and afterwards I explained everything that, I get on these calls afterwards with the young people and like, Marcus, today on the call, you talked about CapEx versus OpEx. What did that mean? And I explained what it meant.
Yep.
This is why.
It's such an awesome opportunity. I wanted to get back to, you sort of glossed over the, I adopted a high school, and I want to kind of, because that's probably not as easy as it sounds, particularly a public high school. So you read the paper, you see the article about the school, you reach out to them. How do you actually end up adopting the high school? And then how do you get curriculum into it that's not part of the curriculum?
Yeah. That's a great question. That is the question.
Yeah.
So what I did was I had dealt with some schools before and realized that dealing with the public school system is really challenging to introduce new ideas. And I'm not being derogatory of the school system. Sometimes it's not anyone's fault. It's just literally the bureaucracy of the public school system, right?
Inertia. Yeah.
Totally. And so, and I come from a family of educators. I've always, you know, both my two kids went into the public school system here in California. My daughter went to a private college, but they both went to the public school system. Um, I went to the public school systems. My mother of my two kids was a teacher in the public school systems here in San Bernardino County, so in some underserved communities. My father's a college professor of 40 years at Virginia Tech teaching political science. My mother was a college professor, math professor. My brother's a doctor at Michigan State and also teaches. So I'm part of I always liked and enjoyed being around the school system. I probably would do that as a living if it wasn't, I don't know. It's unfortunately, it's not very lucrative to be in part of the public schools.
Yeah.
So like,
Right.
I try to do that stuff on the side because I really enjoy doing it. But my day job, I work at, I have my own business or I work at Deloitte or Bain or whatever. So to answer your question, I realized that all of my Silicon Valley buddies, their kids were learning all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw my own kids coming from the public school system, and more importantly, their mom, my ex-wife, teaching in one of the underserved communities. And I realized they're not learning any of this stuff. And so what started to concern me was, you think we got unemployment now, wait until 10 years when all this AI and robotic stuff that I know a lot about does everything that these kids could even do without a college education. If you look at the Amazon Go store, I was talking about that 5 years ago, that you're not going to have clerks in a store at retail. Those aren't going to be jobs anymore to get a job at Walmart. Like the Amazon Go store, if you're not familiar, they're all over the country now, and there's nobody in those stores. There's just artificial intelligence cameras that are on the ceiling that when you walk in, you swipe your Amazon Prime membership to get into the gate of the store. Nobody in the store, literally working. And you just go pick products, put them in your basket, and you walk out of the store, and then you get charged for whatever you put in your basket, because there's all these artificial intelligence cameras that can make sense of what you're picking up and putting in your basket, so you walk out. My point is, that's just the way the future is going to go. And now with COVID, it got accelerated, because who's going to want to hire people back into positions that they just fired people for, that now are susceptible to pandemics when we have the next one, that you have to shut down your whole supply chain or shut down your whole operation? People don't want humans in those positions.
That's
now
right.
more than ever, I've got CEOs calling me up and saying, that AI and robotics stuff you were telling me about 5 years ago? And I said, I don't want to be the poster child for firing my workforce and putting in AI and machines, even though I see China already doing that and they're out competing us. Well, Marcus, I don't have to be the poster child for that. COVID's the poster child for getting everyone fired. I didn't have to fire everyone, but I'm sure as heck not going to hire everybody back as humans into positions that are susceptible to viruses that then shut that down the next time it happens. I've got to put in robotics, from a truck driver to a store clerk to even to an accountant. And so COVID really accelerated that whole process. And I even not thinking about a pandemic to accelerate it, I was worried in 2015, 2016, just the fact that, like, man, you think we got a gap in inequality now with the have and have nots?
Yeah, could get.
It's just going to get a lot worse. And more importantly to me, it's like, man, people are not trained at all they're getting trained for jobs that are going away. I mean, and so I thought it's not that hard to become an entrepreneur, to try to figure out, how do I reskill myself with skills that will let me be self-sufficient, where I don't care if my job gets automated away at Walmart. I still have a skill set that I can use, because there's this whole other opportunity called the internet and all these things I could do, because now I can connect everybody on the planet. And there's also the stats that today, I think it's like 60% of the planet's connected to the internet. And you've been hearing about Elon Musk with Starlink and giving internet access to everybody for cheap. My home I just got in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, I couldn't get regular internet there. It was really poor internet coverage. Starlink just got me 100 megabyte per second internet for $100 a month. So even rural areas are going to start to get really good access to Wi-Fi. What does that mean? That means we're going to add, we're going to take 4 billion people on the planet. We're going to make that 7 to 8 billion people that have access to the internet, literally happening right now, like in the next couple of years. And that means that whole market, that you can be an entrepreneur using the internet, and not the 2D internet on your desktop, but the internet through virtual reality or augmented reality. If you just know what you're doing, it's almost hard not to be able to make a living.
Yeah. Well, plus you're adding billions of consumers to, like, the internet is,
That's my whole point. Like if
The
you're
consumption.
0.001, if you're 0.00001% successful of figuring out some product or service that someone on the planet wants,
Yeah.
now the whole planet can grab it. So you could be 0.0000001% successful, and you all of a sudden have a business because there's so many people. So just a perfect storm or alignment of the stars, whether it's a half, glass half empty, glass half full analogy. And my point is, back to the question about the schools, was I approached him and I just basically shared this with the principal, and he immediately got a meeting with the superintendent, and it was Tommy Welch and I think it was Tommy Chang and Tommy Welch were the two superintendent and principal. Tommy went on to be the superintendent of the Boston School District, but they were just like, I just sat them down. I said, look, at plan number one is, their first instinct was, we got to, you got to present this to the board and the superintendent, to the school board of LAUSD. I was like, absolutely not.
That would be a losing strategy. I know.
Like, do you want antibodies in the core to smother the innovation that we're doing on the edge? That's a great way to kill this whole program.
Yeah.
You know what will get them excited is when this 15-year-old that we mentor starts to run their own business in a couple years. It'll speak for itself, and that's exactly what happened. Like Marco, the one student in the class, he was featured in the LA Times for running his own business. It's the exponentialdestiny.com website shows this whole profile. Marco, you literally see the LA Times article about how this young person went to run his own business, where he created a catering business within his own neighborhood to cater. Because I taught him, how do you look for opportunities in your own community to give back to your community, but also to serve your community because others aren't serving your community. And that's an exercise I taught these young people. And Marco said, you know what? I see weddings and graduations and birthdays happening all the time, every weekend in my community. What my community does is we come out and celebrate in South Central LA. We have all these weddings and we don't go rent a hall to have a wedding or to have a birthday or have a graduation. With more modest means, we just like to have it, all of our family and friends over to our house, and we have this celebration, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's like, nobody's catering any of these parties. The big catering companies don't come in and cater parties in South Central. So the young man, Marco, literally created a business called Waiters in Distress is what he named it. And he literally went out and created this business where he catered all these parties and weddings and graduations in his own neighborhood and in other adjacent neighborhoods. And he created a whole business, and he literally started hiring young people from his community to be they do all the cleanup, they set up all the tables, they break down all the booths, they prepare food, they help cater the whole thing at a price point that's feasible for that community, right? So it's a win-win because the community wanted this. And then you'll love this. I taught him about how do you introduce new technology into those models. Well, the first thing he did was he didn't even have his driver's license yet to run this business, so he had to get Uber to go to some of his jobs. Like, isn't that so funny?
Nice.
He had to take and that's new technology because that didn't exist because he couldn't have run that business. That's what I mean. If you're an entrepreneur, the littlest things like you can get from place A to place B taking an Uber, and you just put that Uber charge into the price you charge your client to do the catering. But now he could do something that years ago he couldn't do because he's going to have his mom drive him, or he's going to have to carpool, or it wasn't feasible. But Uber as alone as a technology innovation, he learned how to leverage that. And then where they pivoted, Mike, was they started to realize that the one thing that they were doing at all these parties that everybody loved was they would take a drone. So they went and got drone certified by watching YouTube videos. Pablo was on his team. Pablo's another young man I mentor. He was 17 at the time or 16 at the time. They went and learned how to operate drones on the internet. They went and got a drone because I was teaching about all these emerging technologies. The drone technology is something that only a big government had 10 years ago or a few years ago. Now you can buy it off the internet. And they were taking photographs and video from a bird's eye view of the parties and putting it on social media. And that got to be a thing. Like, people loved it. They're like, they wanted to hire him because they did the catering, but they also posted all these cool shots from drone footage over the party and social media. And everyone likes social media, for your wedding or your graduation. So they spun off a new business, which is currently their business, called Fifth Sun Pictures, which does that type of promotional video for companies and businesses and things. And so he actually figured out a new business to launch after Waiters in Distress. I mean, it's such a cool story, right? So getting back to the high school, I told Tommy, like, they got, first of all, to their credit, they got it right away. They're like, you're absolutely right. We're not teaching about any of these things. And remember, Mike, I wasn't coming to them saying, I'm a technologist or futurist, and these are all the things that are important. I was coming to them saying, I just got done last week taking this full C-suite of some of the largest companies in the world out to the NASA Singular University campus, up at Silicon Valley, the NASA campus, where I spent 3 days with them with a bunch of experts, basically teaching these CEOs of the largest companies in the world. I'm not going to name drop here, but these were the largest companies in the world that I was working with, right? The C-suite. This was the work I was also doing with Peter in X Prize and Singular University. I just got done spending 4 days with them, making them aware of the talent that they're going to need. So they're going to start talking to the MBA schools and the colleges saying, we need people that know AI and robotics and 3D printing and this new thing called blockchain. And this was in 2015, 2014, people weren't talking about this yet. So I could see the sucking noise from corporate America and just from society, from business, from employers, from government. I was also working with a lot of mayors and governors. This is the staff they needed, and no schools were preparing it. So my purpose to go to the high school was like, guys, I'm not saying I think these are cool things that you need to teach. I'm telling you, I'm talking to I'm seeing upstream what business wants to hire, the skill set they now need. They're going to start talking to the college programs. Those college programs are going to start to recruit this. So if you want people out of this high school to get into a good college, they should talk about these things in their college interview. And he said they're not. You know, they were basically teaching the kids how to code. I'm like, I don't think coding is going to be something they're going to be able to bank on. Like AI will do most coding. So I think it's good to learn your brain like the modern day reading. So I think coding for that reason, it teaches you deductive reasoning and logic. But I don't think it's a skill that 99% of the people that learn how to code will actually be able to develop their career around. I think entrepreneurship, technology entrepreneurship is much more valuable. And that's what this program was called. It was called Exponential Entrepreneur. It was the predecessor to the Exponential Destiny. And so to their credit, you know, they're like, and I emphasize to them, let's not go to the broader school board and try to get something approved. I don't even want to talk to the broader school district at this point because I've been there. I know that you have to then wait in line to get. I said, let's just think of a creative way to take some electives where you have options like these electives. One was like a business elective.
Oh, okay. So
we threw it into the business elective, and luckily Tommy Chang, the superintendent, was giving us coverage. And then we took the teachers, and these were 2 award-winning teachers. They were like Teacher of the Year teachers. And basically I met with those teachers and they were like, well, Marcus, I'm a little nervous about this because we don't know anything about this. I'm like, you'll never know anything about this. It changes every day. It's like super agile, innovative technology. It's always changing. What you need to do is teach your young people how to be resourceful enough to go learn about it and then come back and teach the rest of the class it. So the whole model was, let's give them, 2 weeks on artificial intelligence, 2 weeks on robotics, 2 weeks on 3D printing, 2 weeks on blockchain. I'll come in and do the first talk or bring some expert in so they get level set. But then just have them go out the internet and get articles and come back in groups and teach everybody about it. That will be enough. That will actually be enough to where they start, once they understand what it is, they'll want to research it a little bit more on their own because it's just cool tech, right? Yeah. And that's how it started. And we really kept it away from the school board. They did it twice a week. These students went twice a week in class, like 30 or 40 of these young people. And then sure enough, if you go back today, the program's still in effect. It hasn't really atrophied much. Teachers have moved on to other schools and stuff like that. But the young people like Marco graduated from this program and now they're giving back to those programs. They go in and do
nice.
Stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned too that you've sort of always been ahead of the curve. And I've been thinking about that ever since you said it. And I'm like, there was timing, with the internet. But how is that something that's sort of unique to you, do you think? Or is it something that, like, how do you be that person who's always ahead of the curve?
Well, I think it's not hard to be ahead of the curve if you come up understanding technology. And so I was never afraid of technology. Some people get a little freaked out by it because it's too mysterious and they think there's something real complicated about it. But, my mom sent me to a IBM computer camp when I was in high school, which was, that was like DOS computers, not to date myself, but that was like the first IBM personal computer that you get at your house.
Sure.
And so just having that in the house got me around it. And I remember building some very simple basic, using basic programming language to build I remember creating like I would create Michael Jackson music tunes to like these animated Michael Jackson figures walking around. And it was basically a way to get me to start thinking about coding. Now, was I going to be a coder where I was going to make a living off coding? No, but I now knew enough about computers and how they work to be able to go apply that into business or social impact. And that's kind of what I think is important, is there's a technical literacy, and I would call it a technology innovation literacy, that you kind of combine that with an entrepreneurship basic literacy. And that combination of things will immediately build you confidence, because I can give you 1,000 of examples of how people are actually able to make a living. I'm not promising, yeah, and if you want to be real ambitious, maybe you'll go launch a startup and be a billionaire, who knows? But for more pragmatic purposes, I don't think it's very difficult to show a young person or even adult learner, because I really like to work with adult learners too, like someone that's 35 that's struggling with how to make a living, how can I reskill myself. I really don't think it's rocket science to take a very base level of entrepreneurship understanding, like how do you go figure out where there's a need, like Marco did in his neighborhood with serving his neighborhood around catering. How do you go recognize a need? There's plenty of needs out there. And then how do you figure out how to use technology to be competitive, to where you win, you can do that, you can fulfill that need better than other people can, because you're a little bit more savvier on some technology. None of which I tell these young people is anything harder than what they've mastered with posting videos to TikTok.
Right. And I love that story too, because he started with a business that isn't, sexy, right? It's just get in, start a business, and then he actually had this strategic byproduct sort of off of it with the drone thing, and then, went into wherever that's going. So you don't have to start with like an app, or you just kind of have to get going, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's about building apps either, because not everyone, that can be intimidating, someone thinking about how to build an app.
Right.
Sometimes it's just connecting dots. It's like, okay, in my neighborhood, I see a lot of stuff happening and I don't see it being served. Weddings, anniversaries, birthdays. I wonder if I could create a business that people would want to compensate me for coming out and doing a lot of that.
Right.
Am I going to be a millionaire doing that business? No, but I could scale it so I could do a lot of these where I do have an income.
Yeah.
And I can keep my resource low, because my resource costs low, because I'm going to hire people in my neighborhood to do this. And we're going to be professional. We're going to be astute about it. We're going to have a good work ethic. So it's not for the lighthearted, and then that's going to segue into something else, which is the drone capture technology, right? And I would say that now with virtual reality and augmented reality, you can go create all these new worlds as a creative person, and that will be a business for you. So what Marco did was pretty interesting and innovative in his own unique scenario, but I think it's the 1992 and the internet coming about now. I think the opportunity is there. And I've taken young people who didn't even know what spatial web was, and within 8 weeks, I'm now employing them with a professional salary. Not because I'm giving them a handout, I need them because I have the demand for it.
And when you describe spatial web to CEOs, C-suite people, how do you describe it to them? What's the easiest sort of way to describe it?
You know how in 1992 you started to hear about this thing called the internet and websites, and you thought, I wonder if that will change things for my business?
Yeah.
Yeah. The internet is now about to take a giant leap forward into the physical world or into the virtual world. And it's going to open up so many more. We're going to laugh about the fact that we used to experience the internet on a 2D screen or a phone. So that's about as far as I need to get, where they kind of realize, and I talk with credibility because I know this, I'm not fat. I can back those statements up with real data and empirical data to show them the trends and everything, to say, this is a thing and you can have blind spots to it. And I'm not saying drop everything. I'm saying at a minimum, don't be caught flat-footed when this takes off in your industry and you're sitting there trying to figure out what it is. Imagine if you at least built some muscle of competency around the internet before it took off, versus just sitting there flat-footed when it took off and playing catch up.
Right.
It's almost your fiduciary responsibility as an executive of a company to do something in this space right now to scratch the surface at a minimum. And so what I tell executives, I'll help you in a matter of weeks. I'll help you get 2 years ahead, so you are fully competent around it, and then you can make an informed decision of whether you can put this on a back burner for a little bit, or you're ready, or whether or not you want to capitalize on it now. But when it does take off, and it will take off, I don't have anyone arguing with me about that. That's just obvious if you look at all the trends in the data. When it does hit your industry hard, if you didn't decide to be a pioneer with this and push it yourself, at least, again, you're not caught flat-footed. You can really get up and running quickly. And so nobody's arguing with me about that, and it's understanding really the emergence of a lot of different technologies, a lot of blockchain architecture that's supporting these decentralized spatial web capabilities. There's a lot of the virtual reality, the augmented reality. There's artificial intelligence that you now can get for free off of the cloud and plug into these environments.
Right.
There's quite a bit. It's just like all these technologies are merging. So if you've mastered all of that and you understand it real well, it's hard not to find opportunities to help companies or like I said, I'm working with one of the largest school districts in the United States right now on a big project. And I do that pro bono. I don't charge these nonprofits when I work for them. I only charge the commercial work, but I'm helping them rethink how they do, almost like I did with the high school in South Central LA in 2015. Now I'm just taking it to a whole new level because everything's going to be in virtual reality.
It was for anyone who hasn't done it, this exposure that I got in spatial web was just so incredible because we've been mentioning that, like all the changes that have come from COVID. When I put this on, I went into these different virtual rooms where entrepreneurs or companies had set up, whether one was building a big resort, and like in the middle of Wyoming or something, hard to get to a place, and their clientele or their prospects were global, right? So their challenge was, how do I get people to come fly to Wyoming so they can so they can see what they're buying? Well, they brought them right into everything about it, and it wasn't like completely built out or anything, but it certainly gave you the impression that trying to get people to come see something that they would have to tangibly see in order to make an investment in, maybe something that no longer is going to be necessary.
100%. No, you build these digital twins, and the inflection point is the fact that, remember, you were in a headset that you're using today, which has finally hit that inflection point, right?
Yeah,
the technology has finally got, it was a $300 headset. Remember, that $300 headset 5 years ago was a $2 billion acquisition that Facebook paid a 19-year-old college dropout for.
Right.
Palmer Luckey. So that's a $2 billion acquisition 5 years ago that Facebook paid to a guy in his garage, 19-year-old, that built it. Right. And now you got it $300 on your headset. The thing is, it doesn't stop here. Now it's hit that. What reason I call it an inflection point is it's finally ready for showtime. Because we've been talking VR and AR for a while. It's finally ready for showtime. And secondly, Apple just announced this last way. They didn't announce, it was a leak, but it's strongly supported that their headset they're coming out with next year has 8K resolution. You know how much more advanced that is than the Oculus that you had on your face? Because that Oculus, you have to admit, Mike, that Oculus was at a resolution where you're like, wow, this feels.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
Okay, so that was 2K resolution in each eye. 400% more resolution is coming out next year by Apple in their headset. And then they're going to come out, and then Facebook and Apple are also announced their glasses they're coming out with. So it's not even going to be a headset. They're going to eventually have glasses. My point is, wake up. Do you not, if that experience was good, you think 400% higher resolution means it's crystal clear quality. You aren't going to want to fly across the world to see something that you can just see a digital twin of in that environment, because it feels exactly the same.
Yeah, and for buying all kinds of buying things, you think about how all kinds of, especially, high-end things are sold, where people get on planes and they go travel somewhere and they go to a meeting and they pull out a slide deck, or they.
Yeah, no, that's all. And it's just weird because COVID just showed us all that we like doing. We don't like to be on planes to go spend all that time just to go see something.
We like to be home. Yeah.
Yes. And so, you even saw in that virtual reality room, I took a Tesla and I made it small, like a little Matchbox car.
Yeah.
And then my superpowers, I made it big, and then I put it over your head, and now you're inside the Tesla, or you're inside the engine.
Yeah.
The engine. You saw that? So
that was so cool.
And so my point is this: even if you could come down to the dealership to see a Tesla, we would probably put headsets on to look at it, because I can show you things I can't show you in real life. I can show you the inside of the engine and stuff. So it's at that inflection point where it's better. And you can collaborate better in the environment. It's not like a Band-Aid because we have COVID and I can't see you in person. It's actually preferred, even if I could see you in person. Right. Now, there's, of course, the ethical dilemma of well, don't we like to meet people in real life and all that? And of course, I'm not making judgment on that. I'm just saying the reality is virtual reality is very close to reality, and it's just going to get better from here on out. So we're going to find new use cases for it, and it's basically the internet. It's basically the internet going into 3 dimensions, right?
Yeah.
And
And
it, yeah.
you're not even gonna, so I think you're not even gonna realize you're not in a face-to-face conversation, because even like what we were in, you could like break off with a person and have a conversation that
Yeah.
no one else could hear. You
Yeah.
know, so it was
Like just like real world.
yeah,
Well, the other thing is, what's going to be interesting is, I'm starting to put digital humans into those avatars. So you might not even know that you're not even talking to a real person. It might be a customer service agent that just is having a natural language discussion with you, but it's actually, and they look like they're right there in front of you talking to you, but it's actually an AI agent. That's the next big thing that's happening with the advancement of AI. This is not to get weird, but like when you hear, there's some very serious people that I know that are some of the leading people in technology in the world, and some of the discussions behind closed doors that they have, which is not a science fiction discussion, it's not a absurd discussion, but some of the discussions is that when you hear people wondering, are we already in a matrix? Are we in a simulation? That's a very kind of hokey thing to talk about, where people get all like, oh, that's so funny. Like, who thinks that? You must be a real futurist to think that. But all you got to do is put on the headset that you were in and realize, if this got 400% better resolution, and you started to introduce smell, like through oils, as well as tactile feedback, like you now can get gloves and things you can wear that give you tactile feedback.
yeah.
You could start to imagine that, sure, if we fast forward 100 years, could it be that you don't even know you're in those environments, and it is actually a simulation that you're in? And so that's, it's kind of interesting to think about, like, are we actually in a more advanced society that's already in a simulation? Because our brain, and I never would have bought into that notion. And I'm not saying all I'm saying is that it's very easy to understand how your brain could get there, with how easily it is to fool you with this $300 headset that's currently at the dot matrix version of the printer, not the laser printer version yet.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We're playing Pong and Atari right now with this thing, relative to where this will be probably in 10 years. And so if you say this Atari Pong level graphic is something I'm going to be laughing about probably in 5 years, not like 40 years like it took us, because it's an exponential curve. It's not a linear curve. So I don't have to wait a whole generation before it goes from Pong to PlayStation 2. That's happening like in the next 24 to 48 months. And if that happens, it's not hard to realize, wow, it's going to be very difficult for your brain to understand if it's looking at something real or not real. Because in this Pong version of this headset, I feel like that's already starting to happen.
Well, plus when you look at just the things in law enforcement with witness stuff, like our brain thinks it sees stuff all the time that it didn't see that way. So being able to trick it.
And also PricewaterhouseCoopers came out with a study that I often reference, which shows that they did a test with virtual reality learners versus classroom learners versus Zoom learners. And the VR was dominatingly better in every category of learning, 3 to 4 times more effective than classroom.
Right.
And that makes perfect sense to me, because I'll tell you what, when I'm in these VR meetings and I'm on with client call after client call, some of them we do on Zoom, some of them I meet in VR and we do it. You know which ones I remember and I don't ever have to take any notes? Is when I'm in VR, because I lived the experience.
Because you're in it.
I'm in it, yeah. So sometimes a client will say, remember we talked about this business requirement, we said we needed A, B, and C? And I'll literally go through my memory and think, yeah, you were standing right in front of me, you're up on the whiteboard and you're writing it down. I totally remember that, but it was all virtual reality that we did that in. Versus if you told me on a Zoom call, I probably would forget, because I got a bunch of Zoom call messages coming at me. I'm not, I have to take notes for something like that because I'm not experiencing it. It's not immersive or experiential. So it's no surprise to me that the learning effectiveness has already proven it's better. That's why I'm doing a lot with schools, right? But also, what business isn't successful because of how effectively they teach people? If you got a sales force, you want to train them better. If you're a financial advisor, you're basically educating your clients on how to do their wealth management. If you're an insurance company, you're basically educating them on their health benefits. It's all education and learning. So if you know that it's 4 times better in VR, that right there tells you that you're missing the boat if you're not doing this, right?
That was cool with the wealth advisor too. He would actually be able to take people into the future. Like they say, oh, in 20 years, I want to have this and I want to be doing this. And he could actually create that stuff so they could actually see what the future would be like if they, start saving or doing whatever the plan is. That was really cool.
Yeah, that was a client of mine who's he owns a wealth management financial advisory firm. And like, here's the other thing that's kind of cool about that. Same thing I tell teachers. You don't have to think traditional. Like if I'm going to create a virtual reality solution and strategy, Mike, and I'm a financial advisor, for example, rather than saying, I'm going to build a virtual, my instinct is I'm going to build a virtual office so people can come in my virtual office because they can't see me because of COVID, or they, some of my clients are across the world. Well, wait a second. You're dealing with virtual reality. You're dealing with virtual real estate, not physical real estate. You don't have to be handcuffed by these frames of thinking that someone has to come in your office. You can build a virtual office for every one of your clients, and you go visit their offices, and their offices have all their
custom design. Yeah.
Yes, it's custom design. And the incremental cost of building a new office is the same incremental cost of taking an extra photo on your iPhone. Zero.
Amazing.
Where before it cost a lot. That's the whole Kodak thing, right? It costs a lot for another piece of film and taking another picture. But as soon as that cost was democratized to where there is no incremental cost, it's just the storage space cost, which is a fraction of a cent. You could take as many photos as you want. You can create the stuff I'm doing with schools is like, rather than building a classroom for all the students, why doesn't each student have their own classroom and the teachers go visit them in their own classrooms? Would that be a better model? I don't know, but at least we can think about it. We're not restricted by that thinking.
Sure. Well, Marcus, this has been a fantastic, fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to do this, and I thank you for all the work that you're doing, not just the cutting edge stuff with businesses and stuff, but all the giving back that you're doing to schools and to mentoring and to all these other things to create future opportunities for so many people that are got to be so different than what they thought their life could or would be, prior to being exposed to this stuff.
Yeah, you should interview, if you want to interview Marco or Pablo or Samantha. I got a nice balance between young men and young women too, which is really cool. But you should have that group on. You should interview them all. It'd be an amazing discussion you'll have with them.
I would like to do that, so I'll connect with you to get some contact information.
Cool. That's great.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
All right, Mike. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at mikemalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.